Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, it is an honor to welcome you to the IPC event, celebrating 10 years of the SSF Guidelines, small-scale fishers and Indigenous Peoples solution for advancing food sovereignty. I'm the facilitator. Margaret Nakata has already introduced. In Uganda, I work with 1,050 women organized under COFI Women Development Trust. We are members of the World Forum of Fish Harvesters and Fish Workers, and we are globally organized under the IPC. As mentioned by Dr. Maureen Williams, the recipient of the 2022-2024 Margarita Rizaraga Medal in her speech, I'm the recipient of the medal for 2020-2021. This side event is a celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries and aim to discuss comprehensive framework for advancing the rights of small-scale fishers and indigenous people. Is organized by the World Forum of Fish Harvesters and Fish Workers, World Forum of Fisher People, the International Indian Treaty, La Via Campesino, members of the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. The event seeks to inspire the states to ensure sustainable and just food system that fulfill human rights obligations. The IPC has been a global platform for small-scale producers in the development of the SSF Guidelines, and we are committed to support the implementation. We aim to maintain a momentum and continue discussion surrounding the report of the Special Rapporteur on the right to food, highlighting the indispensable relationship between the right to food and SSF Guidelines in promoting justice and equity. Our panelists from the left, from my right to the left, will offer invaluable insights to policymakers, propose practical solutions, focus on analyzing economic and development policies impacting small-scale fishing communities, and showcasing best case studies as transferable model for SSF guidelines. Additionally, learning from the SSF Summit will be shared, and let us aim to discuss programmatic strategies to embed the right to food principles within the implementation of the SSF guidelines across national and international spheres, aspiring to consolidate insights and catalyze actionable steps for the small-scale fisheries and indigenous peoples. First, we are going to receive a message from Professor Michael Fakri, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. Professor Michael is a professor at the University of Oregon School of Law, and he teaches a course on human rights, food law, development, and commercial law. He is also the director of the Food Resilience Project on the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Center. He holds a doctorate from the University of Toronto, a master's from Harvard Law School, a bachelor of law from Queen's University, and a bachelor of science in ecology from the Western University. Colleagues, join me. We receive the message from the UN Special Rapporteur.
Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the 36th session of the Killing Young Fisheries. I apologize that I can't be there in person or to speak to you live, but due to time zone differences in my work schedule.
As we work out the technicalities, we invite you to join the session. We have front seats here. Please, you are welcome.
especial on the right to food. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the 36th session of the Committee on Fisheries. I apologize that I can't be there in person or to speak to you live, but due to time zone differences in my work schedule, I have to record this video. What I'll do is just briefly discuss what a human rights perspective brings to discussions on fisheries. When you discuss fisheries through the notion of human rights and human rights obligations, that means that you start with the people who have the most at stake. In the case of fisheries, that means you start with talking and focusing on small-scale fishers. They have the most to gain and to lose in today's world. And I'll highlight two reasons why small-scale fishers have the most at stake. First, small-scale fishers are the first to feel the brutal effects of climate change and biodiversity degradation. But also, they are the first to understand what's going on and what needs to be done. So what is at stake for small-scale fishers is not just their livelihood, but their way of life. Second, small-scale fishers are embedded within their community. Their practices, their well-being, their livelihood, and their sense of self is interwoven with the very community they are a part of. Whereas if you treat fishing strictly as an industry or purely as a business, then the ocean becomes a source of commodities. Whereas in reality, the ocean is a source of life. For these reasons, human rights starts with a focus on small-scale fishers. When small-scale fishers suffer, that reflects the fact that an entire community is suffering. What gives me hope is that there's already a well-negotiated policy tool that can guide countries in their meeting their human rights obligations and addressing the needs of small-scale fishers. And of course, I'm talking about the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication, more popularly known as the SSF Guidelines. The SSF Guidelines recognize small-scale fisheries as essential to social, economic, and environmental development. The SSF Guidelines are the culmination of years of advocacy by fishers and fish worker organizations, and were developed through the participation of over 4,000 fishers, fish workers, and others from 120 countries. And then they were negotiated and endorsed through the FAO in 2014. They are the principal instrument to address sustainable and secure development of fisheries, and a key tool to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The guidelines are key to fulfilling the right to food in the broadest sense in the context of climate change and biodiversity. So it's for these reasons that I hope that COFI decides to permanently put on its agenda the topic of small-scale fisheries with an emphasis on human rights as specified in the SSF Guidelines. This will allow and enable COFI to coherently and consistently address the complexity of today's problems arising from climate change, biodiversity degradation, and unfortunately the increase of armed conflict. The final point I want to address is the issue of aquaculture, specifically industrial aquaculture. In my work, I've met many policymakers that put a lot of hope in aquaculture. And I think aquaculture still raises a lot of questions. It's not the magic answer to address or work around today's major problems. Aquaculture sometimes raises a lot more problems than it's worth. It puts the health of aquaculture workers at risk because of prolonged exposure to toxic chemicals. There's a public health risk because of those same chemicals. There's a risk of loss of biodiversity if those farmed fish escape into the wild. And aquaculture is often presented as an answer to the global trend of increasing seafood consumption rates. But I think that's the wrong framing of what's at stake for the whole world. if you want to address increasing rates of hunger, which is the core issue of the day, this is different than addressing increasing consumption rates. Hunger and malnutrition are not caused by a lack of food. It's not a production problem. Of course, food production rates matter, but hunger and malnutrition occur when there are political breakdowns and institutional weaknesses. So my final message is really, if you take care of your small-scale fishers, you in effect take care of your coastal communities. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Professor Fakri, for inspiring us from afar and to make sure that we anchor our discussions here on small-scale fisheries on human rights. So we are honored to have the presence of Mr. Juan Echanove from the FAO Right to Food. And he's going to answer this question, and we hear from his response on how we can develop practical strategies to integrate the right to food principles in the implementation of the SSF guidelines at local, national, and international level, aiming to gather valuable insights and initiate concrete actions to promote the rights of small-scale fisheries and indigenous people. We would also like to hear from you on what are the linkages and principles between the right to food and the SSF guidelines. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for.
Thank you so much, and thank you IPC for organizing today's event. As Michael Fragri was speaking, I was looking into this panel with this beautiful drawing of fishes, and I was thinking, I wish we could see also people, not only fishes, because this conversation is about people. Rights are about people, right? And when we talk about people in fisheries, I think there are two words that kind of define the situation and why upholding the rights is so important. One is marginalization. Small fishing activities are largely marginalized in our economic systems, in our policy systems, in our legal systems. And the other one is invisibility. We are meeting here in this hall. It's a very visible hall, and we know that in most conversations around fishers and fisheries, small-scale fishers are not part of those conversations, right? So today we are celebrating, this year we are celebrating two anniversaries. One is the 10th anniversary of the SSF Guidelines, and the other is the 20th anniversary of the voluntary guidelines for the progressive realization of the right to food. But actually both things are two sides of the very same coin, because they depend on each other. We cannot fulfill the realization of the right to food without fishes for the diversity of our diets. And we cannot fulfill our mandate towards the right of small-scale fishers if we do not realize at the same time the right to food, right? So these guidelines for the right to food are aimed not just to put food on the table of everyone in this planet, but food which is safe, food which is diverse, food which is culturally appropriate. And small-scale fishers have a critical role to play in that regard. And that has to happen in a way that empowers the communities and which is non-discriminatory. So again, we're talking about discrimination in the sector, and non-discrimination is a core aspect of upholding human rights. So after this lengthy introduction, and back to your question, where I to see the entry points, the connection between both important guidelines. I guess one critical topic is protecting traditional fishing grounds and ensuring secure access to their resources. And there is often this trade-off, and I had the pleasure during the Saturday to join you in your amazing weekend of celebration of small-scale farming, and some of the presentations there were highlighting these cases where there is conflict between conservation, protecting the environment, and protecting the rights of the small-scale farm fishers. But when you look deeply into it, in most cases, it's not really a conflict at all between nature and people. It's a conflict between high interests on the one hand and people and environment in the other, hand to hand, right? I guess another critical aspect here is gender. If we talk about invisibility of small-scale fishing, when we talk about women in the sector invisibility, it's definitely the word to define it. I remember back in the day before joining FAO, I was working in a global NGO in care, and at some point we wanted to do some research on existing evidence in terms of the significance of the role of women in certain aspects of the small-scale fishing. And even at the level of information, even at the level of data, there is huge, huge gap. I dream that one day our sector could be gender transformative. I am that at the very last it could be gender sensitive, right? I think another area where both guidelines speak the very same language is creating an enabling environment. I don't know if you had the chance to play with that wonderful game there, with that wheel on creating an enabling environment. I wish creating an enabling environment would be as easy as moving that ball, right? But anyway, I guess the message is that we all know what is needed to create an environment enabling this. At the end of the day, the critical piece is the political will, right? I think we also have to keep in mind the importance of participation. And I know civil society organizations in the sector would wish to be taking part in the conversations happening this week. Participation is crucial. You know, it's part of the definition of human rights. You cannot fulfill human rights if you do not ensure participation of the stakeholders. And finally, establishing a robust monitoring mechanism. And I must say, after 20 years of the voluntary guidelines for the right to food and 10 years of the SSF, that's probably the aspect where we all need to push harder. We need monitoring mechanisms to assess to what extent this is or not happening. And I mean by assessment, qualitative and quantitative assessment. But we also have to make sure that in these countries where legislation or policies or strategies have been enacted, that the judiciary is aware of this, that the human rights organization institutions are aware of this, and that the civil society again has a voice that they can raise to protect and defend their rights. So thank you again, congratulations for this wonderful side event, and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enchanebe. Rights are about people, and you have encouraged the participants here to place SSF people's rights at the center of all discussions. We will now hear from Rochelle Driver, a representative from the International Indian Treaty Council on subsistence fishing, indigenous fisheries challenges, violations and best practices, and she will tie in on contaminants and the impacts on fish and human health. Over to you, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you everyone who took the time to come here on your lunch break today. Sorry, as Indigenous peoples, we usually will introduce ourselves again. It's very important that we center ourselves and our homelands and our traditions before we share with a larger group like this. So as Margaret said, my name is Rochelle Diver. I'm from the Anishinaabe people. We reside in what's currently known today as the United States and Canada. The name of my nation is Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. So really further reiterating how close our people are, both to the lands and to the waters. So we share, Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake by surface area in the world. So the idea when we talked about what IPC would share in the speakers' corners, it was really important that we gave space to the voices or the topics that weren't really included in this year's COFI agenda, and were maybe briefly touched upon in the Small-Scale Fisheries Summit. That includes Indigenous peoples and subsistence rights. We have a different lens in which we look at fishing and how we relate to the ecosystem and how we relate to our food. So we thought that that was important. We also see some very well-needed regions highlighted here, but in that regard, we see a few of them left behind. There are fishers all over the world, and we need to hear from all of them because small-scale fishers are marginalized in every region of the world. So we really need to highlight all the regions and all the small-scale fishers to make sure that we are inclusive. And when I talk about the different lens that we look through and our cultural connection to the fish, I don't just want to use my words. I want to share with you just a bit of a story that will highlight our cultural connection to the fish and the ecosystems. Nenebuju cut a hole in the ice, placing his decoy into the water. He reflected on the stories of his elders that detailed times of deprivation and struggle. In those times, the animals, the fish, the plants established relationships with the Ojibwe people, giving their bodies to sustain them through tough winters. Nenebuju remembered the suckerfish who gave his life to ensure the Ojibwe would survive the harsh winter. The Ojibwe finally refer to February as the suckerfish moon. So this is cyclical, this is holistic. The fish are our relatives. They're not a commodity. They're not market-based for us. So it's important that when we're acknowledging small-scale fishing, we also remember how that relates culturally, but also how important it is to sustain certain communities. My partner is Inuit from Alaska, from the Arctic Circle. They don't always have the choice to go to the grocery store and buy what they want. If illegal fishing or overfishing leads to them closing the mouth of the Kuskokwim River, that could be detrimental for their livelihoods, but also for their health. It's important when we're able to live closely off of the land so that we're exchanging those nutrients. We are a holistic part of this ecosystem. We don't want to be buying store-bought food. We don't want these toxics and processed foods in our diets. We see what they do to us, the diseases they cause, heart disease, diabetes. So that's what I'm thinking about when I hear about the right to fish. And when I think about what subsistence fishing means, not just for Indigenous peoples, for all small-scale fishers. We are all subsistence fishers. In that regard, I did touch basically quickly on environmental toxics, and so did two of our speakers here. In my community, our young women of childbearing age are encouraged not to fish or not to eat the fish anymore. Why? Because they're completely filled with contaminants, mostly mercury, high levels of mercury. And the reason we even knew that this was happening is because the babies were reflecting that high level of toxicity at birth. Our women are giving birth to babies that are pre-polluted with mercury because of coal-fired power plants, because of mining and other extractive industries, and contaminants that come from pipelines. And let's not forget the pesticides, the persistent organic pollutants that are attracted to the cold. You can spray a pesticide in the global south. Within 24 hours, it can reach the Arctic, where it goes to settle and to live. So as we see the ice melting and we address the impacts of climate change, that's also happening in Alaska and fishing communities. These toxins, as the ice melts, are being released back into the air to impact all of us, everyone in this room. So I only had a short time to touch on some very crucial topics for Indigenous peoples, which was quite a heavy responsibility, right? We're not a homogenous group as some peoples. But I did my best to give a holistic view and share really our cultural connection and of course the threats we face, because the only way we're going to move forward towards a toxic-free future and a true healthy environment, we need to all come together, work together, speak truth to power, be at the decision-making table and in all spaces where our rights are on the table, our livelihoods are on the table. So I'm just going to finish up by just adding a couple more mechanisms to what was stated in the Small-Scale Fisheries Summit. Of course, we want to tie this to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and Biodiversity. For Indigenous peoples, the Small-Scale Fishery Guidelines must work in tandem with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the story I just shared about the impacts we face on toxics, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, I also think is a very, very important space for fishers to be in, to have a voice there. So I will not say goodbye to you. I will say until we can continue our conversations over the next week. Chimigwich in my language is an abundance of things.
Thank you very much, Rochelle, for that call for including small-scale fisher in our discussion, for sharing that spiritual relationship, cultural relationship with fish from your community, and about the impact of the extractive industry to your communities and particularly to the fisheries. Next, we are going to hear from Nadine Nebat. She's from the Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organization. She's going to be presenting the results from the SSF Guidelines assessment, exploring on actionable strategies to embed human rights principles within fisheries policies and practices across all levels of governance. Welcome, Nadine.
Thank you, Margaret. I bring greetings from the global movement, and welcome, and we're happy to see you all here. So I come with some of the hard politics. I was tasked to bring our voice to this forum. One of our vice chair in the Caribbean called me very recent and asked me, Nadine, why is it every day I wake up and I have to fight? He feels like it's always a struggle for small-scale fishers, especially in the region that I represent, in an everyday basis, and I had no consoling words except to say, as long as we continue the advocacy, we might or we should be heard. And so with that, I start my presentation that I've noted here, and we approved the SSF Guidelines in 2014, and this was a major victory for us. And then after that, we were tasked with the implementation of these guidelines. So this was the bigger task of it all. So fisherfolk organizations, they look at opportunities in each country, state, province for implementation. So now we're here 10 years later. And we want to wish to inform you that at this COFI, we have a 23-member delegation of the IPC, that's the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. Previous days, we had an even larger delegation of small-scale fishers represented. And we collaborated and we conversed, and the representation of SSF from various regions, we have noted some observations of the happenings over the years, and especially during this week as we coordinated together. But I found a research by Duke University, and it says that we have 700 small-scale fisher organizations globally. And so these organizations, they are the ones that are instrumental. We help policymakers understand the significance of the contribution of SSF. And this is to have also a sustainable future. But despite our importance in documents, we are very much always marginalized by our policymakers. And we can list a good number of reasons why policymakers should listen to us. And one, of course, is that we possess local knowledge and expertise about marine environment, fish stocks, and sustainable fishing practices. So we wish to state that at this moment, we are in great suspense on our mission of small-scale fisheries guideline on the agenda. We want to have it back on the agenda. Our weekend, we covered, we could not emphasize enough the small-scale fishers, and we want to, of course, include our women, Indigenous people, we are an important ingredient in the global food system. We provide nutrition, we heard a lot of statistics today, to 1 billion people, especially those of the global south. So the implementation of the guidelines is crucial to ensure sustainable management of the marine resources and resilience of local fishing communities. And I want to make special recognition and importance to states, that small island developing states, because we are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We are directly affected. I want to make an example of the hurricane that just passed in the Caribbean region while we were here, Hurricane Beryl, and that was linked to climate change. The experts spoke about the warm oceans waters contributing to its being a Category 5 hurricane. And so in this June, that was like a historical moment for such a hard hurricane at the start of the hurricane season. And it left, at least accounted for, 9 persons dead in the region, in the Caribbean region. So I want to just quickly hit on some of the positions and the messages we have collected over being here for some days from the global movement. And we spoke a lot about the financialization of conservation initiatives. And these often prioritize large-scale industries such as offshore mining, aquaculture, marine, biotechnology, and these are made priority over us small-scale fishers. And these initiatives are promoted globally, and they are closely tied to ambitions, for example, those of the 3030 agenda. We know some ways to help small-scale fishers. It's to invest in value addition projects that would consider product diversification, quality improvement, and market access. Additionally, granting access to fishing grounds support us with infrastructures to enhance efficiency at sea and policy support. I need to highlight this, Margaret, I'm at the end, but we need to highlight that the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, IPC, conducted regional assessments in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the conclusions and findings were not that promising. We still have a lot to go and a lot to do in terms of implementing the SSF guidelines, but we do want to acknowledge those countries that have made good some progress in these efforts, especially those that we heard today in those presentations, the 3 with the action plans and the 4 that are in the process. So we definitely are happy to hear that, and we bring recognition to that. But in recognizing the 10th anniversary of the SSF guidelines, we want to amplify the voice of fisher folk and empowering communities to monitor their own progress. That's the point I want to make towards securing sustainable fisheries through participatory approaches and more inclusion and effective implementation of the guidelines. Finally, we have not forgotten our friends in Palestine, especially in respect to their survival and food security. So I want to thank you. That is the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Nadine, for re-emphasizing, for bringing the voice of Fisher, of why every day they have to wake up to a struggle, and also to highlight that as Fisher Folk organized under IPC, we are undertaking a people-centered assessment on the implementation of the SSF guidelines. And please allow me, as one of the country that undertook the assessment, and because this session is on social development, when we were doing the assessment with the women and on social development, and we asked them to assess the status of access to health in their own perception. Now we are not looking at the records and the statistics. And their answer was, we need the government to give us medicines for bilharzia in a periodical manner and not in a sporadic way. And this medicine should be enough. We need to be counted first, and they bring medicine that is enough for us. That was their report back on how they see the access to healthy services. We are now going to continue to our last panelist, and is Suman Kaliam Manda of the East Coast Fish Workers Union of India, and he's going to be reporting on the SSF Summit, which we had for the last 3 days. Welcome, Suman.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm Suman Mandal from India. My organization is East Coast Fish Workers Union. So, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends. As you know, last 3 days from 5th to 7th, we celebrate Small Scale Fisher Summit here. So the last SS Summit has been the culmination of months of collaborative work by the IPC working groups on fisheries, the General Fisheries Commissions for the Mediterranean, the SSF Hub, SOETBIO and FAO, united in the SSF Summit Steering Committee. And we express our gratitude to the FAO. So, in these 3 days, we have learned a lot, we shared enough, and just I am going to put our reflections here. The 3 days SF Summit provided a vital space for 300 participants from more than 60 countries for discussion and experience sharing among SSF movements and indigenous people, including participation from governments, NGOs and academia. It fostered solidarity and unity among SSF, serving as a platform primarily for small-scale fisheries movements and created a powerful space of dialogue. This unity has strengthened our collective efforts to advocate for our rights through active dialogue and sharing. We collected stories, cases that illustrate the current situation, recommendations for improvements, as well as the general strategies for further advancing the implementation of the SSF guidelines. We highlight some of the key insights that emerged from our discussions. We think we need to revisit significant challenges to implement SSF guidelines nationally and globally. We observe that SSF are not agenda in most of the countries. But SSF are threatening to access to indigenous and customary tenure rights due to land and aquatic resources grabbing and consideration of free, prior and informed consent. In recent decades, new ocean development initiatives under the blue economy approach, such as marine protected areas, where industrial activities are going on, like oil and gas exploration, shipping, ports and offshore and wind energy, and so many economic activities, have undermined the customary tenure rights of small-scale fishers despite existing legal protections, leading to substantial conflicts over coastal and marine territories, and the forced displacement of small-scale fisher communities without adequate community engagement or consent. SSF, who contributes food and nutrition security socially and culturally, need recognition. SSF people who risk their lives to produce global food and political vision is needed to promote customary indigenous tenure rights and social protection for our SSF people. After pandemic, in some countries, food system transformation need to strengthen and nutrition must be secure, and we demand to promote poverty eradication program. Benefits need to provide local food producer in terms of people's health. SSF faces man-animal conflicts and natural disaster and political conflicts. Need equitable treatment irrespective of gender, women and youth in leadership, participation at governance, decision making, access to health, education and social development. Issues of SSF can't be ignored and must be included in COFI agenda. National plan of action need to be drafted, implemented, owned and funded by state and owned by SSF community also. State should support global strategic framework. So at the end we urge the international community to protect small-scale fish workers and indigenous peoples from competing blue economy sectors. Government governs fisheries with the participation of SSF actors through human rights-based approaches rather than private property rights regime. Recognize SSF people and indigenous people as essential rights holders in ocean and coastal resource decisions. Revise national development plans to include recommendations from SSF communities and indigenous people. Avoid using blue financial instruments to achieve conservation goals and exercise great caution around aquaculture by recognizing the toxic and biological threats it poses to human and environmental health. To hold support to the expansion of the aquaculture sector until the risks are better understood and robustly regulated. Considering all of the above, we urge the committee and the COFI continues as the forum to address strategic and policy issues related to small-scale fisheries as a standalone agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suman. That is a report from the SSF Summit. And for small-scale fisheries, we no longer want to take a bit of here, a bit of here. We want all the recommendations that are coming from the SSF Summit to be implemented, and we continuously, progressively work on them. And that's why I'm not going to take any key outcome from what he has presented. We still have a few minutes, and if anybody would like to have a question, you are welcome, and also to share from your community, because we are celebrating 10 years of implementing the SSF guidelines. Directrices, that's your hand up, please.
Thank you, Margaret. My name is Directrices, and I work with the small-scale fisheries in Tanzania and in Africa. And I want to thank all the speakers for your wonderful contribution, speaking the truth, bringing out the facts about SSF. Being at this space, especially the COFI, it brings together different actors, especially the member states, the governments, to whom the SSF guidelines speak to. We have international organizations, we have researchers, we have the small-scale fisher organizations, Indigenous Peoples organizations, and even farmers who are also small-scale or subsistence fishers. I've been hearing repeatedly, and I'm the one also who is bringing that message about implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. However, what is coming up more repeatedly again is the process or the methodology towards implementation, which is the development of the National Plan of Action. And I even had in the COFI plenary this morning, everybody who took the floor, he was calling for countries or member states to go through the uptake of the implementation through development of the National Plan of Action. So what is it that I want to bring across is having a national plan of action an end in itself. So I think this is a huge question, and what I want to call upon is that having a national plan of action is one thing, but it is the beginning of another huge obligation ahead of us. Because having it and being shelved and is forgotten, we haven't addressed any problem or any challenge. We've heard this morning about how to advance the rights, the human rights. And if we are not having human rights issues indicated in the National Plan of Actions, they are also going to be forgotten. So there are still a lot of issues to be addressed, and Resources is another thing that is very critical. I would want to call upon the international organizations, the development organizations in the countries to support the implementation by allocating resources, not just to the governments, but also looking into the civil society organizations also to implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Editorial, for highlighting the need for putting resources in implementing the National Plan of Actions, but also providing those resources to organizations of fisher and fish workers. Would anybody else interested to take the floor? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm an independent researcher and also representative in the aquaculture association. Now, my message goes to Edith, Margaret, and other nations that are in the forefront of the implementation of the guidelines. In Africa, we have 54 countries, and we have just 5. To me, that is a very poor record, because we know that the orbs of small-scale fisheries are in 3 major regions: Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Now, what I want you to tell your ministers is that come September, when they have a ministerial meeting, they should echo it to every one of them. Ask them the question, why are they here? The Honorable Minister of Tanzania said he is here because of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, and he is proud. I am proud of Tanzania for taking that lead. So please echo it to our ministers that when they meet the other ministers, they should tell them out loud that they need also to start the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And after all, they endorse it. Why do we endorse something we know you will not act on? It is about time we walk the talk. We should make them walk the talk. Please, FAO, international development agencies, there should be a way mechanism to make our government responsible and accountable. Make them walk the talk. Thank you.
On that note, unfortunately, we have run out of our time, and I see already 2 hands to speak. Unfortunately, I'm not going to take any additional questions. I'd like to thank you all who have joined us for this session. First, I would like to thank the panelists, and thank you very much, Puan, for accepting to be part of this discussion. Have enjoyed the rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.